the US has formally accused Iran of delivering ballistic missiles to Russia for the war in Ukraine and has announced fresh sanctions in response. Speaking on a visit to the UK, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Iran has supplied short-range ballistic missiles and Russia is likely to use them within weeks. Iran has denied delivering the weapons. France, Germany and the UK have also announced fresh sanctions. I'd like to welcome Benem Benteleblu, who's a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defence of Democracies. Welcome back to DW. Now, Antony Blinken says Iran has trained dozens of Russian military personnel to use these FATH 360 close-range ballistic missile systems. Now, this apparently has a maximum range of 75 miles. Tell us, what is Russia likely to use these missiles for?
Well, it's a pleasure to be back with you. And finally, as you mentioned, the much-awaited, spoken about transfer of Iranian ballistic missiles to Russia has happened. This is something that the U.S. government has been speaking about since at least 2022, meaning it would be the other shoe to drop, the first one being Iran's provision of one-way attack drones or suicide drones. Close-range ballistic missiles are ballistic missiles that can fly on a parabolic trajectory anywhere from 0 to 300 kilometers. These, as you mentioned, have a little bit of a shorter range, and on the battlefield they have a tactical use to complement artillery. They're designed, I think, in this case, that what they'll do for Putin is to help keep him in the fight. Help him be able to take and hold territory, as well as to be able to strike Ukrainian positions at that distance. So had they been longer range or potentially larger warheads, I think it really would have been a game-changing system. But what is game-changing here is that this state-to-state transfer from Iran to Russia marks the furthest ever proliferation of Iranian ballistic missiles in history and the first one into Europe.
I want to talk about that a little bit more, this cooperation, but firstly just about these missiles. So you're saying it kind of keeps the status quo on the battlefield, so to say. Have I understand you correctly?
Not exactly the status quo. I'm simply saying that these are weapons that allow Russia to remain in the fight or in the war against Putin longer, particularly in light of the fact that Ukrainian pilots are training on some F-16s, that there are Storm Shadow weapons and ATACMS that the US and the UK are respectively given. So this allows the Russians to conserve their tactical strike power and stay in the fight longer, particularly in a scenario where if the West transitions to more sanctions and less military support, the Russian military advance would be brought to you by these kinds of battlefield systems.
OK, thank you very much for explaining that and pointing that out. Now, Antony Blinken has called this a dramatic escalation. You said a little bit earlier that the world was expecting a transfer like this to happen. So is it really a dramatic escalation if their expectation was there that it was going to happen?
Well, I do believe indeed it is a dramatic escalation and a measure of the risk tolerance of the leadership in Tehran and the willingness of Moscow, of Putin in general, to be able to rely on a constellation of revisionist actors, North Korea, China, and Iran, to keep his military in the fight longer against the Ukrainians. When the Americans said that they expected that this would happen, that was based on the intelligence that they had back in 2022, and that was the intelligence the media ran with and publicized. But the reason it's a dramatic escalation is, one, again, it's the furthest ever Iranian ballistic missile proliferation in history, and it's the first ever into the European context. And really, the one reason why I think we have to, look at the past year and a half with a very critical lens is because I would say, because we knew that this proliferation was coming, could the West, could Washington, could the European Union, could NATO have done more to change Iran's deterrence calculus, to change Iran's risk-reward ratio between when they had given drones and when they had not yet given missiles?
Now, just lastly, a number of countries, including Germany, have announced that they'd impose sanctions over all this. Is this going to make any kind of difference, do you think?
Well, had some of these really tough penalties, particularly the ones that we're hearing now from the European Union and from the UK, meaning the banning of Iran Air flights, because after all, this would mean that a civilian national airliner has been helping ferry dangerous and destabilizing weapons further and into a different continent and into a different war zone. That, I think, will have significant ripple follow-on economic, political, and legal consequences for the Islamic Republic. But just as we've seen in Syria, unfortunately, some of these sanctions have not changed the regime's willingness to continue to proliferate these destabilizing systems. So they are necessary, but they're not going to be sufficient.
We're just about to end our show. I'm going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.